Okay, and now it looks like everyone can see it.
Thank you, sir.
And it's the day of asking whose side are you on? Pick a side in 2025. Are you on the side of your people or are you on the side of the industry that's killing your people?
The African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council, along with our other co-plaintiffs, have sued the FDA, our federal government, to make them take mentholated tobacco products off of the market.
Out of 1.5 million black smokers, 157,000 died prematurely from smoking menthol products, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Menthol is an issue for the African American community, but it's also an issue for all kids. It's an issue for other communities of color and the LGBTQ plus community as well. I am one of the original tobacco documents researchers. I was able to document how the tobacco industry specifically predatorily targeted our young black men and others in our community. And it is by no accident that up to 85% of black adults who smoke, they smoke menthol cigarettes. It was a design of the industry.
We are facing a relentless adversary, and that is the tobacco industry. And we cannot stand idly by as menthol remains on the market while all the science in the world and even hell itself suggests that it would drastically improve our public health.
This is why it is so incredibly dangerous for our community, because as we said earlier, 85% of menthol smokers are black Americans.
And so the tobacco industry, they are the biggest targeters, the biggest profilers, and killers of black men. And they kill more black men than every other issue that we think of combined.
Punchline here, and it's been mentioned by others. In 2009, when they had a chance to remove these products from the market, they were the only things left on. In the course of that, hundreds of thousands of black lives have been lost. This isn't a political question. We have to fight this at the local level, at the state level, at the federal level, at the international level. If you do not do this, we will not save black lives, not to mention all the other groups that are using these products.
We stand with those individuals who don't know any better, those young people who are targeted by the tobacco industry to get them to be their next victims. We stand with them and want to help them through cessation and to help them actually remove the scourge of tobacco use in their lives.
When I listen to the speakers speak, I'm thinking like this is a stop the violence campaign, because what they doing is violence against the black community. So this should be criminal, because they know that what they're doing is intentional. And anytime you harming somebody willfully, that's a crime. God has endowed us to be here in this moment, in this time, and it's time to stand up and be accountable.
We stand in solidarity with the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council, calling for a ban on menthol cigarettes. And we call on others to join with us.
I say, let's stand up. Let's raise our voices. We will not be silenced. We don't need to be cutting folks' lives short to put money in the tobacco industry's pockets. Everybody needs to know about the disgrace, the injustice, the travesty that is happening to our people. You don't have to be black to be part of this movement. I don't care if you're a Democrat. I don't care if you're a Republican. This is about saving lives, and we all need to be on the same page. Say it with me. End menthol. End menthol. Say it like you mean it. Say end menthol. End menthol. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Samela. And so again, that was our press conference that took place last month. And I will go ahead and give the floor to Dr. Phil Gardner, who can give us a brief update on what went on that day and what has happened since.
Thank you, Camille. Welcome everybody to this webinar. I'm looking forward to hearing from my colleague Suzanne Schick on this subject. We've talked about it many times before, but before we get started, Unfortunately, menthol is still in play. As I mentioned in my short comments, the only flavored tobacco product left on the market since 2009 have been menthol cigarettes. And I admit there's many other things going on today with e-cigarettes and new menthol products and pouches and, video games that allow you to take in nicotine. Let's not forget as we go forward, let's not forget menthol cigarettes are still on the market. That was a great rally. About 50 of us there, about 35 of us went into the chamber and heard arguments, the government putting forward that this case should be dismissed. And of course, we responded, our lawyer responded that the government had been dragging its feet for the last 16 years, and they need to do something about it. He listened to arguments and said he'd get back to us within 2 weeks. He got back to us actually last week and held a conference. The short story is he says that we need to amend our complaint. Even though he didn't say this, he gave the impression that he would dismiss the case. We are going to move to for a 90-day hold to rediscuss and rearrange our complaint. But I think the real punchline is, and I think I heard Dr. Val mention it in the short video, we have to focus at the local and the state level. There are many great campaigns going on now in Washington State, in Oregon State, in Buffalo, New York, in New York City, just to mention a few. Those of you who are tuning into this, regardless of what happens at the federal level, we can't wait on the FDA. With that, I want to send it back to Camille. I want to again thank you all for coming, and I look forward to hearing from Suzanne. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Gardner. So now I'm going to introduce Dr. Suzanne Schick. So Dr. Schick is an associate professor of medicine in the Division of Occupational, and I think that's a typo. She environmental medicine at the University of California, San Francisco. She's also a member of the Center for Tobacco Control Research and Education at the Helen Diller Cancer Center. So Dr. Schick, take it away.
Thank you so much for inviting me here to speak today. This is an important audience, and plenty of you have been on the ground floor of this research and known about it for a long time. I'm talking to you, Dr. Gardner, and it's good to see your face today. So this image was taken from Hippie Hill in Golden Gate Park in 2019, looking up towards UCSF's Parnassus campus. And this is the 420 Festival. And right here, right now, this sort of cloudy gray that you see down close to the crowd is smoke. And it's creating a PM 2.5 concentration of around 280 micrograms per cubic meter. And what we're going to do, what I'm going to do today, and what I hope you will join me by asking questions and asking me to explain anything that's not clear, is talk about what that 281 micrograms per cubic meter means from marijuana smoke. So first, this research was all funded by the California Tobacco-Related Disease Research Program with money from tobacco taxes. And I did not do this all by myself. It's a cast of thousands. Many people have contributed to the research. So what is our research? Field research, not lab research. We go out to public places where people are using marijuana and we measure the air pollution. And we carry instruments called laser photometers, common names SidePack and DustTrack. We carry air pumps with filters attached to catch material to analyze chemically. And we're looking at what the weather is. If we're inside, we're looking at what the ventilation is. And we're also looking at the people. logging how they're using cannabis, who we think is there. We're not interviewing people, so this is just observational. So we look at how often, what kind of method, what kind of product they're using. We're also checking, like, are you there because you're working? Are you there because you're a customer? And are you male or female? And what do we think your race or ethnicity is? That data is a little soft, but it's part of the picture. So laser photometers, what are those? Basically, they're a device for quantifying how many particles in the air, and particles are what make up smoke, little droplets of oils and waxes. And you can quantify them by pulling a sample of the outdoor air, that's shown in yellow in here, through a narrow tube at a known rate, and then passing a laser beam through it and counting how many light photons get bounced to the side by the particles in the stream of air. Each type of particle scatters light differently, and you do have to know what you're measuring and how your instrument works to calibrate it to get accurate numbers out of it. There are a whole bunch, a new generation of inexpensive direct-to-consumer particles on the market. Most of them are quite useful, but they aren't always calibrated, and they don't always maintain their calibration over time. So purple air, I do look at purple air data when I'm seeing what's going on for air pollution events or looking at indoor air pollution, but this laboratory monitor is more accurate than that and has a wider range of detection. And this just describes how we collect particles on filters. So here's the little particles in the air zooming into the cassette that holds two filters with air being pulled through it by an air pump. We typically use the front filter to measure cannabinoids like THC or carcinogens like polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and the rear filter is treated to bind nicotine. So we're measuring particles moment to moment, and we're also collecting samples of particles from the air to analyze chemically. This is how we count observations. We've got little loggers on our phones set up. So we see someone who's smoking a pre-rolled joint. That gets a click and a number counts up. We count for a certain amount of time, do a screenshot on our counter, and save the image, clear it, and start counting the next thing. What this looks like, this is an image taken at a cannabis festival. And these are our backpacks. So we've got these little plastic discs are basically holding the tubes that are connected to the instruments inside the backpack so that they stay outside of the backpack. And in this case, we have them sitting on a table. Sometimes we're wearing them on our back. Sometimes they're sitting on our laps as we're sitting down. And we're putting them in places where people are using cannabis. Sometimes using tobacco too. It depends on the place where we're going. But for this presentation, I'm focusing mostly on experiments done where people were using cannabis. Now, most of us are familiar with the air quality index, but not all of us really understand what it means and how it connects to real numbers. So it's designed by the EPA to basically communicate risk for a whole group of common air pollutants to the general public. So it measures, the EPA monitors are measuring particles, big ones that are PM 2.5, little ones that are PM 2.5, PM10 is the big ones, little ones are PM 2.5, 2.5 micrometers in diameter and smaller. That's what that means. And almost any time you're burning something, you're creating particles that are in this small size range. Larger particles are more likely to be dust or pollen. It also, though, the instruments the EPA runs measure nitrogen oxides, carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and ozone, because all of those are part of the big picture of outdoor air pollution. And the air quality index doesn't give you numerical information on each one of these things. It sort of basically mashes them together numerically and gives you a air quality index number that's different from a pollutant concentration, and each of these pollutants scales differently because they bring on different health risks at different concentrations. And typically, when you're changing from green to yellow to orange to red, you're looking at numbers that are 24-hour averages. It's only when things are really polluted or changing really fast that we look at shorter time periods with the air quality index. And the air quality index is a highly political number. All these little cutoff points are fought, and it's both, science and economic and industry interests that contribute. So right now we have a threshold recently decreased from 12.5 down to 9 micrograms per cubic meter that defines really healthy, clean air for particles. But we also know that changes as little as 5 micrograms per cubic meter have detectable effects on your health. And really short exposures can, cause increases in your risk of heart attacks. So the air quality index is a useful thing, and it's data that we're familiar with, but there's nuance to it. And I personally wish the thresholds were lower for the pollutants I study. So here's a reminder. Here's our air quality index numbers in the left-hand column. 0 to 50 is green. Now, if there were no other pollutants in the air except PM 2.5, numbers in this range would correlate to numbers between 0 and 9 micrograms per cubic meter. Now, a lot of times when we're having a high PM 2.5 day, it's because we've got a wildfire or something like that. And so PM 2.5 is the most important pollutant. And you can see things go up stepwise, and that anything over 225.5 is considered highly hazardous. And that goes with health warnings. Hazardous means that everybody, whether they're old or young, should avoid all physical activity outdoors if the outside air is that polluted. And if you're young or old or has respiratory or cardiovascular health problems, you should not only avoid physical activity outdoors, but stay inside and don't move around much. So that's our understanding. And we've experienced air pollution. These are data from the Bay Area, Berkeley Aquatic Park, Oakland, San Francisco, San Pablo. And these were really bad wildfire air pollution days. And so like our highest number in San Francisco that day was over 200, so close to hazardous, but we didn't pass over that threshold. And day after that, we were seeing similarly high, but not quite hazardous concentrations. And in New York City, I think it was 2023, they had the really terrible wildfire smoke pollution in June, and their highest 1 hour concentration was 246 micrograms per cubic meter measured at one of the stations for 1 hour. Their 24-hour average that day was 117 micrograms per cubic meter. Now, on that day in 2023 in New York City, they saw increased incidence of emergency room visits and 911 calls for respiratory health. And back in 2015, when we were having a lot of wildfires all over the state, when they looked at the numbers, they saw that, especially for older adults, people who are elderly, they saw increased risks of emergency department visits for heart attacks, that's all-cause cardiovascular, for strokes, cerebrovascular, and for respiratory disease. So when the air pollution gets up near 200 micrograms per cubic meter, you see immediate changes in the number of people showing up to the emergency department, the number of people calling 911. There are immediate and observable health effects. And yet, we've been to 45 different experiments, more by now, but 45 for these, and 80% of them were rated unhealthy or higher, and 44% were rated hazardous. Check out the y-axis here. 200, that threshold for 225.5, that's right down here, real low on my graph. So all of these values over here to the right are up in the hazardous zone. Some of them were measured indoors and some of them were measured outdoors. So if people are using cannabis around you, they are putting a lot of particles into the air, and it is expected to have the same health effects as wildfire smoke or tobacco smoke. So let's talk about Golden Gate Park. We've been going for years, 2017 up to, and skipped a couple of years for the pandemic, did it in 2022, and they
I'm
didn't.
trying to do two things like you too.
I can hear someone else talking. So, different years when we're looking, so the 420 festival, basically it's just a bunch of people gathering in Golden Gate Park, and at 420 everybody lights up. So if you're looking at the time between 4 o'clock and 4:45, these were the air pollution concentration we measured. If you're looking from, pardon me, around 2 p.m. until 5, then these are the concentrations in the event average row that we measured. And we're, of course, always measuring nearby what the background is, and those are always low. So we've got some pretty big variations between 450 micrograms per cubic meter all the way down to 81. What was going on? Was it crowd size, behavior? Nah, it was wind speed, because we're outdoors and the wind does blow pretty fierce off of the ocean into Golden Gate Park. So when the wind speeds up around 33 miles per hour in the gusts, our concentrations are lower, but you're still experiencing significant air pollution if you're at an event like this. And what does that data look like? This is, moment by moment. Starting at around 3, we measure the background, and that's 8 micrograms per cubic meter. We go into the event area, that's 155. And then that year, between 417 and 440 on that monitor, we're seeing 866 micrograms per cubic meter. And then we go back outside and it drops back down to safe background levels. And this is Cannabis Festival. We've been to this festival numerous years too. So this is a 21 and over event. There's an admission fee. It's basically, I'd term it the Harvest Festival for the Northern California marijuana growers. It's been going on for 20 years. And we've been studying it since about 2018. And what we see when we're looking at what people are doing is most people are smoking joints, followed by blunts. Then there's vape pens, dabs, pipes, and every once in a blue moon, we see someone smoking a cigarette, even though that's banned on the property. So, and it's been in different event spaces. The first year and the most polluted year, it was in these big plastic circus tents. Most of the years, it's been in just basically a county fair building up in Santa Rosa. Last summer, they held it in Oakland in the Kaiser Arena. And we see really high particle concentrations. The highest was in 2018. We're at 1,181 average for the afternoon of the first day. And here's our parking lot controls. The air up has been pretty clean. So in 2019, they had it indoors, but it was warm weather, so they had a whole bunch of windows open for ventilation. In later years, it was colder, and so they kept the windows closed, and the particle concentrations were really high. And this is, again, what the particle concentration traces look like. And I just want everybody to remember that there are people working in here all day, all afternoon long. Vendors they set up their gear around 11 in the morning when they have the, special entry people who get to come in first, and they're there until dinner time. And then they're usually, attending events and partying after that. So this is a day-long exposure if you're working at a cannabis festival. And it's crazy high. Remember, 225.5 is what we define as hazardous. And here, you're at 1,212. So finally, we've also done a lot of experiments at cannabis dispensaries because our state allows consumption of cannabis permits to be given out by local government if they choose to. Some of these places permit smoking, some only allow vaporizing and dabbing. Some have specialized ventilation, but most of them don't. And we are deeply concerned about the employees working there, as well as the people visiting as customers. So one dispensary we studied in collaboration with the ownership, we were in there for 5 weeks in 2019, logged nearly 1,000 hours by leaving our instruments running 24/7. and changing out our filters twice a day when business opened and business closed. And the average particle concentration over that entire time when the business was open was 84 micrograms per cubic meter. Their dispensary consumption area was right in the same room with where they were selling their product. And when their business was closed at night, it dropped down to 3 micrograms per cubic meter, even though the business was in a part of town that had a fair amount of natural air pollution from roads and trains. Here is another dispensary that we visited where smoking was permitted. And again, mostly people are smoking pre-rolled joints. They sell them at the dispensary for as little as $8. Some people are using bongs, some people are dabbing, using vape pens, hand pipes, or blunts. But most of this is joints, mostly pre-rolled joints. And here we didn't have permission of the business, so we're just going in the company of other people who were making purchases, and then we're sitting with them in the consumption area. So we did 9 visits of 30 to 120 minutes, got about 10 hours of data. And here in this dispensary where smoking was allowed and where we were only sampling when it was busy, we were going, late afternoon, early evening when we expected peak times. The average PM 2.5 concentration was 840 micrograms per cubic meter. We were able to sample in a coffee shop, same type of building, same block, same size, about the same year built, and equally crowded and busy. And there, the PM 2.5 concentration was only 4 micrograms per cubic meter. Interestingly, this business installed a specialized ventilation system halfway through our set of experiments, but it didn't seem to make any difference. Here we're plotting the PM 2.5 concentration against the number of customers, because you expect when there's more customers, there will be higher concentrations. The orange dots were experiments done after they installed their ventilation system. The blue dots were done before. And if their ventilation system made a big difference, I would expect the orange dots to uniformly be below the line and the blue dots to be above it. And that's just not what we saw. They spend a lot of money on an expensive ventilation system, but when people are smoking, they're putting out so many particles at once that a ventilation system really doesn't work if you have continuous smoking. So if you work at a place like this and you're there 8 hours a day, Dispensary 1 was the non-smoking dispensary. Dispensary 2 was the dispensary allowed smoking, and the Emerald Cup was Cannabis Festival. If you're there for 8 hours and these are the average particle concentrations and you get 16 hours when you're not, what is your 24-hour average exposure? If you're working in the smoking dispensary, your 24-hour average exposure is so high that it's hazardous. If you're working in the dispensary that doesn't allow smoking, it's in the moderate level, and the Cannabis Festival is pretty much very unhealthy. We chose to average all of the years. If you'd been working in one of the smokier years, it would have also been deemed hazardous to be exposed like that at your work. So what increases the risk of getting a dangerously high exposure to PM 2.5 when you're around people who are using cannabis? Are a lot of people using it around you, or just one? Is there open windows and a lot of air exchange, or is there not very much? And are they smoking it as opposed to using it as an edible or as a vape or a dab? In summary, we've been to a lot of events, and normally in our area, we've got nice, clean air. So background is clean and good. If you're in an outdoor event where people are just happen to be smoking cannabis, like a concert or a street fair, then you're seeing PM 2.5 concentrations that are between 20 and 50. That's moderate, that is to say yellow to orange on the air quality index. If you're at an outdoor event that's really focused around cannabis, your concentrations get a lot higher. If you're in an indoor space where people aren't combusting, but they are dabbing, using vaporizers and vape pens, you can get up to hazardous exposures depending on how many people are doing it while you're there. And if you're in any indoor space where the primary activity is smoking, then you're going to be exposed to hazardous levels of air pollution, pretty much guaranteed. And people say, why should we worry about the workers in dispensaries and at cannabis festivals? They're all smokers anyway. But the thing is, actually, not everyone who works at cannabis events or in dispensaries smokes. as time passes and these businesses become more common, they start recruiting employees who aren't hardcore cannabis aficionados, they just need jobs. And we've also seen when we were studying the end of smoking in bars in the US and abroad, that smokers benefit from clean air too. If you worked in a bar and were a smoker, after the smoking ban, your health improved. We saw increases in lung function. That's in the improvement in the forced expiratory volume 1. And we also saw fewer respiratory systems. And that's a couple of different experiments, in a couple of different countries. So being exposed to secondhand smoke is bad for both non-smokers and smokers. So people sometimes, give me side eye for doing this research. You go out to parties and cannabis festivals and concerts and do science. Yeah, right, lady. But doing field research is a lot harder than just going there for fun as a customer or an attendee. You have to concentrate in a crowded public place. You're often dealing with extreme noise. If you're up in a concert hall, there's often steep stairs and a lot of fall risk. There's stage smoke. There's clumsy drunk people all over the place. And for getting our research done, we're finding a lot of concert venues are shifting to limiting what people bring in, which makes it harder to bring in our instruments. And finally, the crowded events are the hardest to monitor and often the most polluted. So some of this research, like we can only get into a certain level of crowded event. Once it gets above a certain level, you can't move around. It's hard to see what people are doing. And you don't know whether your instrument is really located in the best place to measure what's really there for air pollution. What we like about studying cannabis events is that people care about this data and people are interested. Event attendees ask us about it, city council members, health professionals. This is research that's easy to talk about because a lot of people wonder and a lot of people care. Sometimes it is fun. You may not enjoy it at the end of the night when you're tired, but the beginning of the night, the music and the entertainment are often wonderful. And it's not scary. We don't find that our cannabis intoxicated people are aggressive or disinhibited. And if you've been going to concerts and public events for your own pleasure throughout your life, I would say that this is an easier crowd than the people who might be drunk or on stimulants or hallucinogens. So in summer, secondhand high. People always ask us about this too. Well, you must be getting high. No, not really. So when we look at total cannabinoid concentrations, we're looking even in very polluted places between 57 and almost 300 micrograms per cubic meter, most of which is THC. However, if you say 200 is your concentration, you're not breathing that much of it in. Taking standard data for how much volume people breathe in, say you've got a 150-pound person, you're breathing in maybe 91 micrograms per hour, and you don't actually absorb all of that in your lungs because THC is kind of not as soluble as nicotine. So you're absorbing maybe 10 or 30%. Let's take 30%. You're absorbing 27 micrograms per hour. And our standard THC dosage for psychoactive effects is 2 to 10 milligrams, so 1,000-fold difference. At 200 micrograms, it would take 9 hours of secondhand exposure to inhale 2.5 mgs of THC. And while you're inhaling it, your body's metabolizing it. So you're not building up to a psychoactive threshold for most people. I will say that I don't feel high while I'm doing this work. My employees don't feel high when they're doing this work. We do get tired, though. And in summary, the use of cannabis often creates hazardous PM2.5 concentrations. Smoke is smoke, people. No lie, no shock here. And the primary health risks of any combustion-derived PM2.5 is cardiovascular and respiratory disease. The fact that there's a cannabinoid in it that has potential health benefits does not take away from the health risks to your blood vessels and your lungs and your heart and your brain of the secondhand exposure. And of course, smoke-free policies are the best way to control PM2.5. So I will pause here and open the floor to questions. And if anybody, I can take people back through the slides if they want.
Thank you, Dr. Stick. That was really eye-opening. And I see we have a couple of questions coming in the chat.
Okay.
There's a question that asks, is there a difference between PM 2.5 concentrations for smoking versus vaping?
Okay, so if you are talking about the secondhand exposure from smoking versus vaping, you will be exposed to more particles from smoking because there it's burning and it's letting out smoke even when it's not actively being puffed on, whereas a vape pen only puts out particles into the air when someone exhales. And people do act as pretty good filters. Vaping is less polluting, but if somebody's working hard to make a big plume, then yes, you're definitely getting exposure. And vaping, vaping can be mean a lot of different things. Some people vape dry herb, some people vape liquids. It is a lower exposure, as we saw in the non-smoking dispensary, but it's not low enough to be safe. You're not down in the green for your actual health risk. And improvement, but not a safe thing. And like the people, the dispensary owners that collaborated with us were really disappointed with us for not publishing a paper that said, go raw, this is awesome, do vaping instead of smoking. Yes, it helps, but it's not a thoroughgoing solution because people's lungs and blood vessels are very sensitive to chemically reactive small particles, which is really what your PM 2.5 is. And I see another question. Thank you. How do you protect your lungs from the smoke inhalation? We don't. We just don't do too many events very often. You cannot show up to one of these events and expect to be incognito if you are wearing, a respiratory protection device. We're going there trying to blend in, and so we don't wear respiratory protection. But we don't do this more than once or twice a month, and we don't do it with people who have any health risks. And if you work in my laboratory, this is not required of you. This is something people do on a voluntary basis because they care about this research. We do plenty of other things in my lab, so it's not mandatory. Can I go back to the slide about smokers having improved health? Yes. And what was that other one? Let's see. So your lungs are damaged, you just aren't getting high. Yeah, that's a good summary of it. And okay, so the slide about smokers. Yes, I'm happy to do that. Let me get back into presentation mood and hop back up there. Okay, this is the one. Yeah. No, not that one. This one. Sorry about that. So basically, this is data from two separate experiments. One of them was done in San Francisco by people in my division, and one of them was done in Scotland. And they were both done by studying people before and after bars and taverns went smoke-free in a given area. Does that make sense? Do you have more questions? Okay, another question. This is a little off topic from the presentation, but I was wondering if you know of air pollution research suggesting why we shouldn't include exemptions in tobacco-free college policies for smoking in personal vehicles or designated smoking areas. Alrighty, I would say that good reasons for not having exemptions for personal vehicles is basically you're still bringing smoke on your body when you come out of your vehicle after smoking. So if you're sitting down next to someone in a lecture hall and you've been smoking in your vehicle, then it's all over you and it's measurably contaminating the environment you're entering. That's probably the hardest argument. But for designated smoking areas, it's because people have to clean those damn smoking areas. And those smoking areas usually blow smoke onto somebody else unintentionally, depending on the weather. That one's a pretty easy one to explain and argue. I'd say personal vehicles is a little more difficult and frankly very difficult to police. In general, how do we average citizens protect ourselves from the increased smoking coming from cars as people smoke while driving? You don't. You know, you can't protect yourself from everything with regard to air pollution. I would say that a momentary exposure, unless you do have respiratory or cardiovascular disease, is not going to add up to a significant health problem because you're not around it for long. But if you are vulnerable health-wise, it is a problem. And we're doing the right work to eventually stop this. I don't know if everybody's heard, but like my research is funded by the Tobacco Related Disease Research Program, which is funded after tobacco taxes. And they're reducing the scope of their granting because they're earning less in tobacco taxes because the bans on other forms of flavored tobaccos have had a big effect on tax revenues in California. People are smoking less. It's hard work that we do, but it is helping and it is working.
Any other questions? You can go ahead and type them into the chat or go ahead and take yourself off of mute.
Yeah.
I take myself off of mute for a quick minute. Thank you, Suzanne. It's great to see you. People should know I was one of the program officers at the TRDRP that helped start and support Suzanne's work and still do. I do want to go back to the question that was posed. People have to remember there's a thing called third-hand smoke, and this is after it's exhaled or after it sits in the ashtray, it lands on the rug, on the couch, on your cat, on a plant. And we actually have data that shows that third-hand smoke will reemit carcinogens, some different than the carcinogens that were in the original smoke. So yeah, having special places, that just means there's going to be special nicotine there. Let me just make one last point, and this is towards Suzanne's point. Smoke is smoke, whether it's a forest fire, whether it's burning leaves in the driveway, a cigarette, or a joint. These are things we call biomasses. And when they're burned, they produce the things that Suzanne have talked about. Thank you, Suzanne.
My pleasure. Is there time for me to address a couple of more questions in the chat, or is it okay? For those of us battling the spread of cannabis lounges in our communities, do you have this data that we can share with policymakers in layperson's terms? All right, so I've published a couple of scientific papers that show in dispensaries the air pollution levels. I'm working on a broader, more general paper. And I'm happy to work with you to adapt my slides into something that can, that you feel comfortable, like you can stand up and own and present and not feel like you're, unsure of yourself. So just contact me personally and I will help you work something out. I have also do plenty of expert testimony at these meetings, city councils and other things. We do not always win and it pisses me off, but I'm down for the fight.
All right, thank you, Suzanne. That's Tara Leonard from Santa Cruz, and our policymakers seem to be willfully ignoring the science and the data around this issue. It's sort of appalling. They're just not interested. And so I'm trying to figure out a way to make this more scientific, data-driven approach palatable to them. So yeah, I'll reach out.
Yeah, you can't. I've been talking with, other public health groups, American Heart, Non-Smokers for Americans' Rights, and I'd say we're really in a fight with policymakers because they love that tax money and because the cannabis advocates are always bringing lots of really appealing people to witness and testify at these public meetings saying, I need this desperately for my health. If I can, there's no legal place for me to smoke. What am I to do? And another strategy I think we need to really own and take into a consideration when we're in a losing position is making sure that we share the work with the people who actually choose to smoke. So making sure that if we lose on a policy, we at least get in a method for logging complaints about exposure in multi-unit housing or exposure from people who are near a cannabis dispensary that has an on-site consumption place. Basically collecting the data to document that it's causing harm, building that into the legislation. That's, another idea that we're
Thank
working
you.
on.
Good
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah, I'm still really pissed off that Sacramento allowed the cannabis cafe bill, and I did testify against it. And the slide said, yes, this is shareable. It's not in a position where I can't publish it, and so it will be available to you. And again, if you need my help tailoring it to a different audience or getting it to the point where you feel like you can own it and talk about it, I'm happy to work with you. I think that's everything.
Okay. Yeah, I don't see any other questions in the chat. Shout it out if I've missed you.
I'm sure I'll share all of the slides in response to the question. Would you mind sharing the slide that shows the bar graph toward the beginning of the presentation? Yeah, it's going to be, I will, make this available as a PDF and again, work with anybody who wants to adapt it. All right. Thank you all for your attention. It's an honor to speak to you. You do good work. It's good to be on the same team. Thank you.
Thank you again, Dr. Stick. Really powerful presentation. And, like several of us mentioned in the chat, this is very timely. We have faced this issue in Oakland, and the city of San Francisco is taking it on, soon. So thank you. Before I let you all go, I do just want to kindly urge you to fill out our survey. You can go ahead and scan the QR code, and we will also send it out in our follow-up email. Last, I want to invite you all to a webinar next week that will be led by several members of D9 organizations and researchers who have attended historically Black colleges and universities. The name of the webinar is Nicotine, Menthol, and Melanin, a Deadly Combination for Black Americans. I will go ahead and put the link to register in the chat, and that will take place on February 18th from 3 to 5 Pacific Standard. And it looks like Charisse has put the survey for this presentation